to come review, you can come back and watch the recording, but just be a little aware that what you say out loud or what you say in the chat is something that I could show people at home. So go ahead and mute right now if you haven't. That way we cut out those background noises. Before I start today, I wanted to just back up a little bit and review what the heck happened last week, because it was a weird week, right? We didn't have live class. It was a little different, and I think some people got a little confused. So I want to start with last week because it's going to affect what we're doing this week. So last week, I introduced you to a survey that the newspaper group or club or class had done. They'd given the sixth graders a survey asking a bunch of questions about how they felt distance learning was going, basically. And your assignment last week was to look through sort of the graphs that came out from that survey and to pick out what you thought was really important information. And this week, what we're going to do is we're going to take that and we are going to start adding some writing to that. So we are practicing the skills that we are going to use next week in our big winter project, which, as a reminder, we are putting together a survey for the group Safe Routes to Schools, and you are going to present the results of the survey to them as a group. And so what we're doing last week and what we're doing this week is practice, so that when we get the results of our survey back that those of you who have Math with Clara are doing, you feel like you've had some practice with this work. So your first time doing this isn't when you're sending it to people that aren't me, basically. So we're gonna do some practice with that. That way next week, when I put you in groups and you're working in groups, you feel really, really good about the skills that we're using. Okay, so today what we're working on is we're going to work on two different specific skills. And if I were a competent technology teacher, I would have been working on presenting this while I was talking, but I am totally incapable of multitasking. So today we're going to work on two things. The first thing that we're going to work on, I think, is something that you might have seen in Clara's math class a little bit. If not, she's definitely going to touch on it. Is combining figures with words to make them easy to understand. So in Clara's math class, you are going to be creating these graphs based on the surveys that you sent out to the school. It is not enough just to say, here's a graph, right? This graph exists. You need to talk about it and explain why it's important, what information is in there for people to understand. So we're going to practice that together. But then the second thing, the thing that you're probably not going to talk about in Clara's class, is we're going to talk about how to look at multiple different graphs. We're going to look at the whole survey, and we are going to give a final summary. We're going to pick out the most important information from all of those different places and make some recommendations. And so remember, right now we're practicing as if we were giving recommendations to the principal or the sixth grade team, which is me, based on what our sixth graders are saying. What you're not doing is you're not saying, well, I personally, as a seventh grader, think this is what the sixth grade teachers should do. What you're saying is you're saying, well, the sixth graders said this, and this seems to be what the sixth graders are asking for. So our job right now isn't to say, this is what I want. Our job is to explain what the data is saying and use that to make decisions. And I'm going to show you all an example of that today. But those are sort of the two skills that we're going to be working on. And you're going to practice those two skills with the newspaper survey of how sixth graders are feeling about distance learning. So this lesson is going to be split into two different parts, each of those two different skills. So the first thing that we're going to look at, and I'm going to need your help to finish this, is I'm going to need your help to combine figures, graphs, charts, that sort of thing, with words to make them more easy to understand. If you remember last week, there was sort of a version that you can read, and there was a version of all of the charts that I sort of made a video of, and I walked you through step by step what they were and explained them. So what you're going to do today is you're going to pick a couple of these that you think are going to be really important, and you're going to explain those graphs or explain those pieces of information. And here's one that I saw a lot of you pick out. Your assignment last week was to pick out which ones you thought were the most important. A lot of you focused on this one. A lot of you focused on the graph that talked about how hard it is to make friends. And you told me that like a lot of the sixth graders, over half of them rated it above a 5, that it was really hard to make friends. But it's not enough just to say, here's a graph. We need to take some time and explain what the heck is this graph saying? What does it mean, right? Because If someone looks at this graph and just says it's a bunch of red lines, right? It looks like a skyscraper. That isn't helpful. So we need to give an explanation for people who aren't so visual. They prefer words, right? We need both because everyone learns a little differently. And I actually, instead of doing this on my own and showing you an example, I wanted your help to just write a little bit of a summary of what this graph says. So I want you to take a look. I'm just going to give you a minute of thinking time while I grab a glass of water. And I just want you to look at this and think, what is this graph telling me? If you can figure out specific numbers, that's helpful too. I'm going to give you a minute of thinking time right now, and I want you just right now to come up with one important takeaway from this graph. The title is How Hard Is It to Make Friends? The left-hand side is how many students gave each response. And then the bottom is what they rated it, 1 through 10, with 1 being it was super easy to make friends this year, and 10 being that it's super hard and they haven't made any friends. I'll give you another 15 minutes of thinking time. Remember, right now we're just picking out one thing. There's one thing that seems important. All right, and so I'm actually, instead of writing on my own, and I know it's a little smaller now, but can I have maybe 1 or 2 people just share out how could we explain what this is saying? I'm looking for a couple of volunteers to help me write this, and I'm just gonna scribe on here what you all are telling me. So did anyone have something that they saw was important in this graph?
Most people find it hard to make friends, so you could say that.
Most 6th graders find it, spelling is difficult, find it hard to make friends. Could we add on a specific piece of data? How do we know by looking at this graph that they find it hard to make friends? And I can take people typing in the chat, I can take people unmuting, whatever works for you. I know not everyone likes speaking over a Google Meet. I'm going to think of what is a specific detail here that shows that the 6th graders think it's hard to make friends. So let me ask you all then, let me give you a little bit of help. Which bars are the highest? Which are the tallest bars? Let's start there.
7.
Right, so 7 is the highest. What's the second highest?
10.
10. So remember, 10 is very hard. They haven't really made any friends at all. A 7 means like pretty hard, but not the hardest thing they've ever done. So what does that suggest that the 2 tallest bars are 7 and 10? What does that mean? We could even count, we can look on the left-hand side and we could figure out how many people rated it 10 and give a specific number. If it's sitting, if we look up, it's sort of between the 8 line and the 10 line. So how many students does it look like said that they couldn't find any friends at all in 6th grade?
9.
9, right? So that's a specific piece of information that we could include, right? So I can write, there were 9 students who haven't made any friends at all this year, okay? And so all we did is we looked at this.
The graph isn't saying that though.
All right, so go for it. What do you think the graph is saying?
Well, the graph is, the name of the graph is how hard it is to make friends. Not, I mean, it could be really hard, but like,
so
it doesn't mean that, no.
What do you want me to say?
But I know.
What should I write instead of there were 9 students who haven't made any friends at all this year? I should say
There
were
were
students
there were 9 students that found it especially difficult. And
It doesn't mean they haven't, but it's been hard.
right.
And it doesn't say this year, which it's just how hard is it to make friends, which is like, if you think about it, in this year, it's totally normal that it's hard to make friends. But in other years, it's a little concerning that there are a lot of people who find it hard to make friends.
And I will say this was all about this year. So I've shortened some of the questions.
Okay.
I sort of took their survey and made the graph, and I was making like 15 graphs in an hour. But it was specifically about all of the questions about this year at OWL and distance learning. Like, how are you feeling this year? So if we look at this isn't a massive paragraph. I think this is only 3 sentences long. But with that, we've given people who have a hard time reading a graph a nice explanation. So what you all helped me write was, according to our survey, most 6th graders find it hard to make friends. The 2 tallest bars are the 7 and 10 bar. There were 9 students who found it especially difficult to make friends, right? So it was just 3 sentences, but for people who maybe have trouble reading graphs, those 3 sentences are going to be really helpful. And so that's an example of how you can match figures or graphs with words to make them easier to understand. And that's one skill that we're going to practice today, so that when you all get your information from the survey that you created back, you feel really good about explaining what these specific questions mean, right? What do the answers to these questions mean? So that's going to be the first half of your assignment today. I'm going to ask you to find 2 different questions or graphs from the survey that the newspaper team made, and you're going to explain 2 different graphs. The other thing that we're going to do is you're going to give what's called a final summary with interesting findings. And this is where you look at more than just one graph at a time. This is where we look at the whole entire survey together, and you pick out the surprising or the interesting or the important information. It might also include recommendations to the people who asked for the survey, which, remember, this time it's sort of, we're pretending it's the principal and the 6th grade teachers, right? So giving them some recommendations based on this information, what might you want to do, okay? And so just as an example, I pulled another graph. This one is how hard is it to communicate with teachers? Mostly the kids said it was pretty easy. And so in my final summary, I'm not going to focus just on one of these 2. I'm going to try and cover all of them and pick out the most important information, right? So this is an example of what a final summary might look like, where I'm focusing on the surprising, the interesting, the important information. And this is what I wrote. I wrote that the survey suggests that students are struggling to communicate with each other and make friends, right? They're having a really hard time with that. However, it seems like they don't have that difficulty communicating with teachers, right? So I found that personally really interesting. The kids were like, it's really easy to talk to teachers. It's really hard to make friends, okay? Because that gives me some information about some things that I could do differently in 6th grade. And so then I gave some recommendations to the 6th grade team, and I said, well, this is important because it shows that OWL needs to do a better job at helping the 6th graders make new friends. Some things to try might be, and then I might give suggestions as to how the 6th grade team could help the 6th graders make friends, right? Because they aren't like you. Most of you all knew each other from last year. Most of the 6th graders don't know anyone, right? And there are some 7th graders who are in that boat too, who are new to OWL. And they are facing similar barriers this year. Now if you don't pick these 2 graphs, you might have a different final summary, right? Because you are going to try and smush the 2 graphs that you choose together to summarize what they're saying and make some recommendations. So here's what you are working on today. Your assignment is going to have 2 parts. Part 1, you're going to combine figures with words to make them easy to understand. You have the graph on one side, and then you give an explanation of that graph right next to it. Number 2 is you are going to take those 2 graphs that you picked out, and you're going to give a summary of what's interesting about it and make some recommendations to the 6th grade team based not on what you want, but based on what the data is saying, okay? So here's our workflow for the day. And remember, this is on Schoology, so you can just take this one step at a time, right? So step 1, you're going to download the 6th grade data summary assignment. That's something that you all should be able to do in your sleep. And then you can check off number 1. Boom, done. Once you do that, you'll slide to box number 2. Okay, just follow the arrows. And box number 2 says part 1, combine figures with words. And says follow the instructions on your assignment, because the assignments are a little bit different from each other. I've got a couple versions floating out there, to explain the results of the survey. You will need to take screenshots of the data to include in this section, right? So I'm going to switch over to Schoology right now. And in Schoology, I've included a couple things for you. I've included today's workflow. You're going to see one of these versions of the assignment. And then there is this survey data, get images from here. And so you'll pull that up and you'll find the graphs that you want to use, and you can just take a screenshot of those and then add that image into your Notability assignment, okay? So inside this, you're going to have all of the graphs, and you can pick which ones you want to use. I think there's like 10 or 11 different graphs in here, okay? So if you decide you want to focus on the one about 6th graders making friends, you might scroll to that one. Let's see, it's got red bars here. I would take a screenshot of that on my iPad and then keep scrolling to figure out what the other one I want to use is. Maybe I would do this one. Have you made any friends yet? Where 16 kids said no. And 1 said none of your business, which I found pretty easy. Okay? So that's
After those,
oh, go for it.
After those assignments, are you going to add more later this week, or is that it?
Nope, this is it. I know some of your other teachers have 2 different folders every week. For the most part, I just give you 1 thing every week. It's going to change a little bit the next 2 weeks because you're going to be doing some group work. But for the most part, we've just got 1 thing we're focused on. Okay? So once you finish taking screenshots of those graphs, putting them in your assignment and explaining them, then you're going to move on to the final summary, which you're going to talk about all of the graphs you used in part 1. You're going to pick out what's important, what's interesting, what's surprising, and you're going to make suggestions and say, hey, Preston, who is also the 6th grade teacher, this is what you need to be doing to help the 6th graders, okay? Then you'll upload your assignment and independent read. This practice is going to be really, really helpful so that when we enter our big final project next week, you feel like you've done this before and like you're not just doing it for the first time and panicking, okay? So even though this is not the big graded version, it's going to make you feel a lot more confident working with each other when you're in a group next week, okay? I, as always, am going to hang around for any questions that people have, or if people are confused, or if you just want me to walk through the lesson again, I can totally do that. But if you are someone who you are feeling good about things, you are welcome to head out and get started on your work for the day. I'm going to stop recording.